So, all my life, I was forced to go to church. At a young age, I wasn't ever fully sure what I was learning each time I went. And having a large family, everyone would share their opinions about the Catholic Church and their own beliefs, and that would cause a lot of confusion for me. But eventually, their beliefs became my beliefs because when you're like around something for so long, you kind of just like go with the flow, I feel like. But after like gaining knowledge from the Christian tradition class and like being at an age where I can like go to church on my own, I started to develop different viewpoints. So for this assignment, one of the churches I visited was St. Michael's Church. This was like one of the churches I went to growing up. So now that I have more of an open mind going to church, I was actually excited to go and learn and form my own thoughts and opinions. Another church I visited was named Church of Jesus Christ of LSD. This is a Mormon church. And the reason I was interested in this denomination is because one of my friends who I met here was Mormon, like she grew up Mormon, and she would just talk about some of her experiences as a child, and they're just really different from mine, so I was just more interested in that. It just really piqued my interest how different we like grew up. When visiting these churches, like the environment of each of them was completely different. Walking into my childhood church, I already knew what to expect. Like the benches were wooden, they were in rows looking towards the altar and everything. And it was like welcoming and made us feel equal. Versus when I walked into the Mormon church, it felt more like walking into a courtroom. It was like intimidating when I was in the Mormon church. At the St. Michael's Church, the order in which they did the service made sense to me. And the order they did was first they would pray, then they would sing like a worship song, then read from the Bible, do a sermon, and then they would end with like going up to the altar and getting the bread. And in my opinion, this makes the most sense because it just works well. It makes the flow of church smooth and like enjoyable versus when I was at the Mormon church. When you first like got there, the bishop would like come and greet you, and that was really different because no one did that at the Catholic Church. But then they would go straight into song, and then they would open into prayer, and then the bishop would talk about the focal points of the meetings that they would be talking about. And then they pass out bread and water, and everyone is silent during this time because this is a time where they're supposed to like reflect on the Savior of Jesus Christ. And then the members of the congregation would speak on topics they were assigned to weeks ago, and then they sing again and then end with prayers. So after being in both of these churches, some things that stood out to me was very different between the two is during Mormon church when they would pass out the bread and water. One, you have to be silent the whole time. You don't have to be like baptized, and like because in the Catholic Church you don't have to be silent, but you're not like loud though at the same time, but you're not like dead silent reflecting, and you actually have to walk up to the pastor to receive it, and you can only receive it if you made your first communion in the Catholic Church. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting. That was one of the things that was very more drastic because in Mormon church you can receive the bread even if you weren't like baptized. Another thing that I noticed was when you go in Catholic church, before you sit, you like sign, versus at the Mormon church, you do not have to. But some of the things that were like similar between them is the way people would dress. They were both similar because in Mormon church and Catholic church, the men would wear suits, women would wear dresses, and even the children would dress up. But yeah, that's how they were pretty similar. But during the service at the Mormon church, I felt like on edge a lot, just because the environment was like completely different than what I was used to. During this like visit, I like felt like it was like at a board meeting almost, just of how everything was structured, which is why I said earlier I don't like the order the service goes in at this church. But yeah, the one good thing about this church was it kind of like made me grateful for the church I did grow up in, because at this church, at the Mormon church, it felt more like they were speaking at you than to you. It didn't make me feel as welcome versus at the St. Michael's church that I went to. But yeah, when I was at St. Michael's church, I just felt like I belonged. I also knew what like the norms were there, so that just also already makes me feel more comfortable. But I also knew what the pastor was preaching about, because it's like he talks more about my beliefs versus the Mormon church, where I don't really have anything in common there. Something that caught my attention at the Mormon church, though, was that there's no like pastor, oh my god, it's a bishop, which is kind of interesting, but they'd also call them meetings and not services. And there's multiple meetings in one. And at they referred at the Mormon church, they referred to him as a different name versus the Catholic church. But during the Catholic service, it talked about the original sin, which was also talked about in class. So it was cool to be able to make those like connections. But the original sin is that all humans inherit a sinful nature due to the disobedience of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In the Catholic Church, we are taught that baptism is extremely necessary because it's the only way to cleanse yourself of the original sin. But being in church and hearing the pastor talk about this, and being in class and hearing our professor talk about this, it was really cool because I felt like I could relate more now that I had more like background information on it. But it was also interesting because in class we are a Christian school, and I went to a Catholic church. Overall, they are very similar, but they are a little different. So the way they each explained it was a little different, but they came to the same end goal. So it was definitely interesting. But this assignment was definitely one of my favorite ones. It was more interesting because I've never done something like this. It was cool to experience other people's like religion, because I wasn't even like really sure what a Mormon was until I learned more about it. So it's cool to be able to connect to how my friend grew up, but it also made me thankful for how I grew up more so. But overall, I did like this assignment.